From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Today, we have the producer of the movie Jesus Revolution, Josh Walsh. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on here. The Jesus Revolution is in theaters this Friday, February 24th. How many theaters is it going to be in?
You know what? You put me on the spot. I know it's over 2,000 theaters, so it's a lot of theaters. Oh, my
goodness.
Wide release.
2,000?
Yes, it's a big old wide release. Pretty much anywhere movies are shown, you should be able to see it.
Oh, my goodness. That's amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. You're hoping it does well, don't you?
Oh, man, you know what? It's crazy. I was talking last night to a friend in Birmingham who has a radio show. And, at this point, I mean, we've worked on it for a long time. This movie has been in some pseudo form of development for, 5 years. The last 2 years, it was supposed to go in 2020, and then it got shut down. And then we kind of revamped it and got it into production last year. But, it's neat. It's God's timing. This film is about revolution and about revival. And I really do believe it's God's timing, even down to the time we filmed it, even the time we release it. It's fascinating to look at the world right now and the interesting comparisons to the conditions that were the 1960s, early 70s when the story takes place. And I think, God doesn't do anything by an accident. And I think we just make the film and we kind of, now it's in God's hands to see how he uses it. That's all we can do. So we feel really good right now as a team. We really are proud of the product. You saw an earlier version of it. There's actually been refined since. And we feel like we've ran a hard and good marketing campaign. And so now we've done our work and we just got to put it in God's hands and say, hey, do with it as you will.
I saw at the beginning of December, an earlier version, and based on what I saw, I'm going to go on the record, Josh, and tell you that it is the best Christian movie ever made.
Thank you. I feel really proud of it too.
I'll clarify. I'll say that coming from the Christian community, I mean, The Passion was a work of art. But I don't really 100%. Consider that with Mel Gibson coming from the Christian community, but from the Christian filmmaking community, hands down, this is the best Christian film ever made. I cannot recommend it enough. It's not like I'm saying, gee, guys, I think you ought to go see this. I'm going on the record saying, you got to go see this. I've never said that about a movie ever. In the over 200 podcasts I've done, I've never said that. But you have to see this movie. Bring everyone go see it on opening weekend. This thing is, and we need to make a statement. I'm just going to go.
Do it.
I love it right here. We need to make a statement to Hollywood. We need to tell Hollywood, we want Christian films. We want Christian films that talk about Jesus. We want Christian films that are about Jesus, that aren't afraid about dropping the J-bomb, that they say Jesus and they're all about Jesus. And that's what this movie is. And so if you go opening weekend and buy a ticket, that's the important thing. I'm preaching right now. I love it. You're loving it. But if you go and buy a ticket this weekend, that's going to send a message to Hollywood, and it's going to help Christian filmmakers make more of these. It's very expensive to get movies into over 2,000 screens. The amount of money it costs to do that would blow your mind. So I'm just telling you, the amount of money that it takes to do this is beyond what you can imagine. So they really need your support, and I'm encouraging you to go do that. How about that?
I love it, man, and it's so true. I've been doing this now for about 10 years, worked on a lot of different movies. For your listeners who don't know much about my story, I started out working with two filmmaker brothers from Birmingham, Alabama, John and Andy Irwin. And I've been with them through most of their career and most of their films, starting with a film called October Baby, all the way through Jesus Revolution. Been a part of movies like I Can Only Imagine, was a producer on that, Woodlawn, Mom's Night Out, I Still Believe, American Underdog. I did a documentary last year with them called Jesus Music. So been a part of a lot of these films, and more so now than ever, uh, Hollywood is looking to what's working, and really a lot of people, can overthink the process of Hollywood. It's quite simple. If something works, they're going to put energy towards it. They're going to put money toward it, and I think they view the faith film audience as a niche, that could work sometimes. And I think if we can get these movies, higher in the box office, if we can get them working, again, I am all about raising the quality of it, making it entertaining. We talked about this, Rick, like the movie has to be entertaining. Like our part of our job is to make entertaining films, so that people enjoy them and want to go out. It's like we have always, especially at Irwin Brothers, we've always felt like we have to earn the message of our film by making an entertaining, high quality product. So I wouldn't want anybody to go see it if it wasn't a entertaining, high quality product. And I really believe, as you said before, that this film is one of our best works and our best foots forward. But if we do well with these kinds of products, more of them will be made. So I know people are tired of the kinds of films that are getting put out, the kinds of content that's being put in front of our families and in front of our kids. One way to kind of fight that is to really vote with your ticket, and really put your money where your mouth is. And so again, we want to elevate the quality, make it more entertaining, make it more enjoyable, make it more widespread thing. But at the same time, we need the support of the audience to come out and really make a statement. And I think this one in particular is poised as a statement piece. It's a very bold message. We weren't really setting out to make it us against them. We were, this is a very unifying message. This is about revival. This is about opening up the doors to your church to people that, you wouldn't expect, and seeing how God can transform their life. I believe it's a very unifying message, kind of like what's going on in Asbury University and other places where you're starting to see these little flames of revival. And I think people are fascinated by it. I think that's God's timing. So that's amazing. The heart of this movie is talking about, hey, what happens when people open up themselves to the gospel and how it can transform anyone, even the most unlikely of characters, which if you really study that time period, it was a very divisive time period. You had the Vietnam War at its height. You had so much racial tension in the country. You had this hippie drug movement that was really pulling all these kids away from the church, away from their upbringings, away from their towns, and creating this whole culture that ultimately was very destructive. And out of that, one of the most dark moments in American history, God just showed up in this incredibly unexpected way, transformed the hearts of the young people of the generation. And out of that has come so much of the church today. I was talking to someone last night and they were asking me about the comparisons to what's going on with Asbury University and all that. And again, none of that was planned. None of us knew any of that would happen. And I don't know how that's all going to pan out, but I know that it happened 50 years ago. And there are a lot of people that talk about revival and study kind of the different moves of God typically does happen in 50-year cycles. So we are poised for some sort of awakening like that right now. And I made the comparison when I was talking to a friend of mine last night that the conditions are so similar. There was so much disillusionment back then with the country, with religion, with and the kids were pulling away from that. I think today, in this next generation, the generation beyond the millennial generation, I think you're seeing a lot of disillusionment with all these things that were supposed to make us happy, social media or connectedness. We were so lonely and depressed, and you're hearing about suicides every single day from different facets of our culture. So I do think there's a level of desperation post-pandemic that it's really, I feel like we're poised for an act of God and then a revival. And again, I don't know if what's gonna happen with this revival happening at Asbury and other places, but I think it's neat and it's kind of a little picture of what could be. So I'm praying, and we kind of feel like, hey, this is neat timing. So let's see what God does. Again, we can only make movies and kind of and do that part of our job. It's up to God to see if He's going to use it or not.
And for those 10 people who might not know what Jesus Revolution is about. It's about the Jesus movement in the late 60s and 70s, focusing on Chuck Smith, Calvary Chapel in California, where he's baptizing 1,000 hippies at a pop and invite hippies to stay in his home. And it's got Greg Laurie, and kind of his story is in there, Lonnie Frisbee. So all of the early kind of start of that Jesus Revolution, which I think the title came from the Time magazine piece.
It did. I mean, so it's very fascinating how we came up with the story. We were doing a movie called Woodlawn a couple of years ago, which is a football movie. It was actually a true story that John and Andy, who are the directors, producers of a lot of these movies, it was their dad actually told them the story growing up about how this revival came to Woodlawn High School in Birmingham, Alabama, during one of the most divisive times in its history. It was right after the school started, started to integrate, and there was tension on the football team between the African American players and the white players. It was a very divisive time in Birmingham's history, and this pastor, who's actually Hank Gruen, John and Andy's dad, felt called to preach the gospel to this football team. This is all true story. Football team gets radically saved, starts playing well together, and out of that comes a football player that became one of the first icons, African American football icons in Alabama football history, Tony Nathan. The outskirts of that story was this global kind of revival that was happening during that time, which was called the Jesus Revolution. And we touch on that in that film. But through that research on that film, we found this Time magazine cover that had, the front cover was this kind of psychedelic Jesus that said Jesus Revolution. And it was 1970, I believe, 1971 cover. What was fascinating is a few years before that, there was a cover of Time magazine that was this dark, blacked out cover that said, "Is God Dead?" And so what John really got fascinated with, who wrote and directed the film, was what happened between the time period of that magazine, of Time magazine cover that said, "Is God Dead?" and the Kind magazine cover that was Jesus Revolution. What happened in between there, and can it happen again? That led him on a journey to say, who are the characters in this? And what's neat about it is, when you study the Jesus Revolution of the early 1970s, late 60s, there's a lot of places that popped up. And that's why it's so neat. This was before social media. This was before really the connectedness of today. But you saw revivals popping up in the South, in Birmingham, in Nashville, in the Midwest, and in Southern California. A lot of the emphasis and a lot of the kind of the epicenter of where that started was this kind of community in Southern California, led by this pastor who was this straight-laced, very like Billy Graham-esque looking pastor named Chuck Smith, and this hippie preacher named Lonnie Frisbee. And it was the combination of those two guys that was a very interesting dynamic story about how kind of this old guard pastor and this hippie pastor came together and started preaching the gospel to these hippies on the beach. And they started getting radically saved. One of those being a character named Greg Laurie, who is now an evangelist and pastor, pretty well known. He was a young man at the time, and he got to experience that kind of firsthand. So our story begins with a young Greg Laurie kind of finding Calvary Chapel and seeing this movement happening, and kind of through his first person view of all that unfolding. I tell people it's an interesting topic because it's a historical piece. It's also funny because you have the tension that I think we all can sense even today in some capacity with the church setting. So think about taking your most Baptist small town church and just shoving it full of these wacky, drugged out hippies. And you can imagine the tension between those two groups. And that's really where a lot of humor is in the story. And it's all true. And I think there's a lot of points of entry for a consumer, that coming to watch this movie. You have a young love story between Greg and Kathy, which is, I think, a very endearing, sweet part of the movie, which they've just celebrated at the premiere of Jesus Revolution, their 50th anniversary. So it's a great story. And then you have a struggling pastor in Chuck Smith and this older kind of guy, kind of having a second act, and then, Lonnie. So there's so many points into the story, I feel like, which makes it, I feel like, a more universally approachable kind of film.
So American Underdog, which is the last film the Erwin brothers did,
yes,
said God. They didn't say the name Jesus. They said God, but it was very faith based. But it was more on his story, less kind of in your face about their faith in Jesus. Whereas this is very different. This is
Yeah.
very, very strong Christian Christ-based message. Talk to me about the difference of that, and kind of, was there a conscious decision to just say we're not gonna think about that, we're going all the way in on this? And
I think so. I think that John Irwin would say that, when, there's different kinds of products, and just, working with studios and Hollywood, the kinds that come out at different times matter. And I think we really had to earn the right to be able to kind of make such an overt film in Jesus Revolution. I don't know if we would have come immediately out and said, this is the next movie we want to make when we first started our deals with the studios we work with. When they said, yeah, that's the one, let's do it. I think over time we had to really earn their trust and say, hey, we really believe there is a large group of people that care deeply about these kinds of films and overt like this coming out. So it's kind of a balance there. I wasn't as intricately involved in American Underdog, but I knew there was talks during that process, even with Kurt and Brenda, that they really kind of wanted to be a little bit more subtle in their evangelistic approach with that film, and kind of just tell the story, let the story kind of do its talking. But when we started the approach on this movie, Jesus Revolution, there was kind of from the onset a belief that we needed to be as bold as possible with this product, because of the spirit, especially the spirit of the story, was that there was this time where these guys were being radically bold about their faith and just expressing it to the world. And I think a big part of that from day one was Greg Laurie being a part of it. Greg is an evangelist. So to a level of that guy, probably if Greg had his way, in the halfway through the show, he would pop up on the screen and give an evangelistic presentation. He's an evangelist, and that's his heart, and it always will be his heart. But I'm so glad, there's always a worry when you're doing true life stories. When you involve the real people, will you stop making a movie and it become more documentary and lose its appeal? When you're making these kinds of true life stories, you have to be very cognizant of that sometimes, the way it happened isn't necessarily the way it will function as a film, and being a part of a lot of these films, sometimes you have to explain that to the people. Sometimes people are more on board. Sometimes they're really resistant to it. With Greg and this one, though, a big part of the through line of the story is evangelism, is revival. And so he was really involved, and we really invited him into that process more than probably ever have on a biographical movie like that. Because we just really sensed there was an importance to the story, and we wanted to get it right. And I would say from day one, from script writing, from planning to look, every bit of the process, there was a reverence to this film set that I had not experienced on any of the movie sets I've worked on. It was just this reverence that what we're doing here is important. We're telling a true story, and we want this to happen again. So we felt like stewards of this very important movie, and that no one really took ownership of that we knew that, this is important. This isn't about us. This is about the gospel. This is about retelling the story. And it's neat is even the posture of the actors, I feel like, changed the environment of the set. I mean, we had Kelsey Grammer, who from day one was so reverent about playing Chuck Smith. I mean, he would go to Greg and say, okay, when I'm handing out these Lord's Supper cups, how would he do it? And he wanted to know about the church and what were the kinds of people, and what did they believe? And when he would baptize someone, he would say, Greg, how would Chuck baptize someone? And there was a reverence to that. Jonathan, who plays Jesus in The Chosen, Jonathan Roumie, he was really just a great presence on the set of just reverence to the message, this time period. He's a very godly guy, loves the Lord. So there was so much prayer on set. Every day we would start the day in prayer. There would be spontaneous prayer meetings, at different places. And overall, even I would say the crew that maybe wasn't leaning faith-based, they understood what we're doing here is something important, and so we're going to be reverent to it. And so that was special to me, especially on those baptism days and on days, that really was the heart of the story. You could tell there was just this respectfulness amongst the people making it. And yeah, I think that's what led to what you see on screen.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you see that on screen. That really is communicated.
Yeah,
It was more than acting.
it was.
It was more than acting. And it was as I was watching it, in the movie, Lonnie Frisbee talks about these kids who've tried everything and they're just lost and they're empty and they're just, they've tried it all and none of it works. And they're coming to Jesus, desperate for him. And I was just, overwhelmed with emotion about, oh my goodness, he's talking about our generation, this generation today who they don't know who they are. They don't know what sex they are. They don't know what gender they are. They're so confused. They're so lost their identity. They're trying things and it's not working. None of this is working. And you see that. You see the backlash of all this. And it's like, oh, our generation is so primed for a revival right now. And then what's happening in these college campuses right now? I mean, right now, this is happening.
I know.
The week your movie's coming out,
Amazing.
This is going on. And it's just like, wow. I would love it if God started, used a movie to start as part of a revival in our land. These kids, these people, they're, and we can get so divisive with the LGBTQ community and these people who are so confused. They don't know who they are. And we need to be baptizing them. We need to be having them over for dinner. We need to be loving them and having them in our homes. And what Chuck did. I mean, these stinky hippies with stinky feet, they're living in his home and they're getting their stinky feet in his church, right? And
easier said than done, man. But I forget who was recently I was talking to about it, and they just said it was what they loved about Jesus Revolution was just that it was the simple, just love of Jesus and allowing that to transform you. It wasn't. They weren't. I remember joking with Greg. The more refined, educated part of their faith came later. A lot of them said, hey, like Greg said, and I thought it was a really cool thing. He said, we came for Lonnie, but we stayed for Chuck. Chuck would disciple these guys and he would bring them deeper. But to begin with, there was just such a simplicity to it, and I think it is like that. I think with revival and with sharing the gospel like that, sometimes it's just such a simple thing that pricks our hearts and really opens us up to the Lord, and the Holy Spirit uses that sometimes, foolish people to be able to, like us, to be able to reach people. That's what I pray for that. I think there's so much divisiveness in our culture right now, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum. Everybody's at each other's throats. Everyone's so tense. And that was the condition, I believe, of that time. It wasn't there. From what I've studied, from what I watched, there was a lot of, I don't know if it was quite as bad as it is now, but there was a lot of tension and divisiveness in the culture. And this simple message of just the good news. That's what the gospel is. It's good news. I think it hit people at that point, and these kids that were just tried everything, and it wasn't working. All the lies, all the promise of what was going to be. If you study that time, and I've studied it pretty in depth, if you look at like the Summer of Love and all those festivals that were supposed to be like life altering, kind of all ended at this one concert at Altamont Speedway, where it just kind of, all the promise just kind of like crashed down. And then there was this great, from what I've researched, a great sense of disillusionment, because now they're like, what now? We've lost, like this is, if this isn't real now, we don't have anything. And they were looking to like this, they were open and they were ready. And I really do feel like the conditions are like that right now, with young people especially. I mean, look at the statistics on depression, anxiety, and things amongst youth during a time when you're not supposed to feel that level of weight, Mm-hmm. And I think that the world we live in, the climate we live in, the social media, the internet, the way that it's so integrated into these at such a young age, I think it's really crushing youth of our time. So I feel like the conditions are eerily similar, but also that makes me super optimistic on, hey, God can move again. It's just the same God yesterday, today, and forever. It's not like it's not like it was so different. I heard someone say that recently, like the gospel works, it works for the kids in the 70s. It's going to work for the kids today.
Yes.
This is the same gospel. So it's interesting to see. I mean, I could be cynical at times too, and knowing like, man, I don't know if it's going to change. I don't know if things are going to get better. But hey, anything is possible with the Lord.
Well, as I was watching the film, I think I cried like 8 times in it. And
Me too.
But part of that was just recognizing the hurt.
Yeah.
And these hurting people, and seeing our culture today, seeing these kids, how hurt they are, how confused they are, how, the depression, as you were talking about, and just longing for revival, longing for a revival in our nation, and an awakening in our youth to know that, God defines them. Everyone is self-defining. We don't believe in God anymore, so we define ourselves. I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a dog, I'm a cat, I'm a boy, I'm a girl. Because we don't believe anymore that God defines us. And so I'd love to see, that we're defined by how much God loves us, how much he cares for us. So what would be, as we kind of close here, what would be kind of your, as we're doing this interview, we're 3 days out from when the movie's released. People might be listening to this and the movie might be in theaters as they're hearing it.
Yeah.
But kind of what are your hopes? What would you hope to see this movie do?
Yeah, I would hope that God uses it. We do, like, we labor and it's up to him to bless. I pray that it would really impact people. It would really cause people to think. I hope young people see it. The core market for our films are typically older, right? Because it's the faith crowd. These are the older women is usually the consumers of our product, and of course we love the people that come out and support these products. But I hope it gets younger, man, like, because that's the future, kind of like in the movie. So I pray that, younger people are drawn to this film and see it. Even if it's opening weekend, it makes a lot of noise. People are curious. Let's go see it. Maybe it's the actors. Let's go see it. See if there's something to it. That's my prayer. It's just that this is a catalyst, that God can use it as a catalyst for change, that he can use it to young people to look and see and ask the question, is that possible? And then older people to remember. I feel like sometimes in conversations with people and going around the country, I feel like that older generation can get cynical, and if you you read the history of great, even pastors and people that are hymn writers, and at some point, even people that write these such hopeful hymns or hopeful songs get disillusioned and they get resentful and they get jaded. And I think in some ways we show that. We don't demonize it. We show that in the film. But I hope that the older generation remembers that first love they had when they experienced the gospel, and when they experienced, loving thy neighbor. I hope they experience that and they remember, and it softens their heart toward what could be. And I think for the young people, that they see it and they say, is that real? Could that happen? And could it work for me? So that's one of my hope.
So you can see the movie going to be in over 2,000 theaters starting February 24th. What's the website they can go to?
JesusRevolution.movie.
JesusRevolution.movie. Yeah. Okay. JesusRevolution.movie. I highly recommend Jesus Revolution. Josh, thanks so much for being on the show. Man, this has been awesome. And thank you for all you're doing on, giving us faith-based, Christ-focused movies that we can go see and support. This is what we need. We need so much more of this. So thanks,
Rick. Appreciate you, man.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture? Let's be clear so the world can hear. Thanks for listening.